Ready?
All right. Welcome back to Book Club, everyone. We're here reviewing The Psychology of Money, written by Morgan Housel. This is, I don't know, our fourth or fifth one now, maybe. But we're doing it to where it's being recorded, and that way we can send it out to everyone to enjoy if you can't catch us in real time. So myself, Kenny is here, and one of our devoted members, Morley. Great to have you again as well.
Thank you. I
So
feel like I'm on a podcast.
yeah, you're the interviewee on the podcast this week.
Exactly.
And this week we're talking about chapters 8 and 9. And chapter 8 is the man in the car paradox. These are both short chapters, but I think some pretty good ones. And he starts by just talking about that nobody really cares what car that you drive.
Yeah, I'll never forget where when my dad bought that car and took that picture. We're like,
You found that in the family photo album.
man, look at that.
Yeah. But starting out, I mean, just talking about, what are the signals of wealth? And one that comes to mind is, your material things. It could be a fancy car, it could be whatever purse you're carrying around or anything else. But that seems to be what people try to show as them having money or what wealth is to them.
Yeah, I mean, I thought he said it. It's so true, and you don't think of. I mean, I think he's just thinking of it the right way, right? I mean, somebody you see drive a fancy car, then they want you to think, "Wow, look at that guy, how cool he is." But in reality, you're not even paying any attention to him. You're just looking at the car and thinking, "Wow, that's a cool car." And what you're really after is that respect, and it's hard to buy that. Is the truth.
Right. The admiration that you're seeking is not really well placed.
Mm-hmm. What was your takeaway, Morley?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that also I think about too, it's like it's that also that power of suggestion, right? When you see your friends have a new car or a new house and you are like, oh gosh, like I want to have that car and that house. And I think it's hard when we live in a society being so consumer driven where so many people put their identity in their belongings. I think it's really hard. I think we all kind of can say it, but it's an emotional thing, and it's hard not to want to have a nice house, a nice car, and want to have some of that respect from your peer group or from others.
Hmm. No, I think you're spot on. And along with that, I think your car or any other material belongings can also kind of show a window inside to what truly is important to you in a sense. Are you looking for the admiration of some stranger who drove by who you'll literally never see again, perhaps? Or does it show something else about your personality or what's most meaningful? So on the flip side of this, this is Leonardo DiCaprio, who at least at one time was driving a Prius, and he's a guy who's earned tens of millions of dollars. Certainly could buy whatever car he wanted, but he's also made it known that he's a big advocate for climate change and that sort of thing. So driving a Prius kind of fits into that mold of letting people know what he's about as well.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't. Yeah, he doesn't need to have the fancy car to get the respect. He's
Hmm.
got he's got the respect through his just his career, I guess, and his fame. Yeah, no, I mean it does. And go ahead. Mark.
No, I just said through his many accolades. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Um, And I mean, I just thought it was such a unique way to think about it. Really, as a valet, Morgan Housel never even paid any attention to who actually was in the fancy car. And that is what you're after. You want people, I think, to think, wow, look at this guy. Look at how much he has. And I want what he has. And you want people to look at you that way because what you're really looking for is respect.
Mhm.
And I guess you think that's a way to buy it. I mean, but it's not. I mean, it's also that people like to drive nice, nice things too.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
Yeah.
it doesn't mean you got to drive around in a Fred Flintstone car. And in fact, there's nothing wrong with having a nice car or a nice
Mhm.
house or anything else. And in fact, people work hard. They should enjoy the fruits of their labor for whatever that means to that individual. Whatever most is important and potentially helps derive happiness.
Yeah. And I think that's the two things, right? It's like, it's for people outside to respect them, but then it's also a misconception of this stuff will bring them happiness. And I know I referred to this before, but the Yale online course about the science of happiness, where, initially when you get a new purchase, you do get a little bit of a happiness bump, but then it's like, once you have it for a while, you kind of go back down, and then there's, that happiness bump isn't there anymore. And so I think it's that thought of like, people are like, oh, if I have this new house, it'll make me so happy. And it probably does, the first couple months you live there. But, similar to anything where you just kind of get used to it over time, then it just becomes kind of the norm, and it's not that thing that gives you that happiness anymore. And I think folks think that, it's going to give you never ending happiness. And it's just material things don't do that. And if anything, they probably bring you more troubles, because then if you think about the maintenance cost of like those kind of cars and those kind of houses, and then you have to kind of keep up with it. And so you probably have a negative happiness score after buying them.
Right. Or even just having a car payment in and of itself, regardless of how big it is. It's like everybody loves the new car for the first 3-6 months, but I guarantee someone who's 6 months into the new car is like, I just hate having this car payment. Car's nice. I like that. But I hate having this car payment.
Yeah. Or when your car is underwater and you owe more on it than what the depreciation, the value of it from the depreciation is. Yeah. Then that probably doesn't make you happy at all.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's the fancy things, but then on the flip side to that is the second half of this quote. If it's really what you're going for is respect or admiration, then know how to seek it. And what truly trumps everything else, which he says is humility and kindness and empathy. That'll bring you more than any purchase ever will. Yeah, not that purchases or material things are bad or that there's anything wrong with it. Just about having some clarity around why you want what you got.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think, just think about, I mean, I think about myself, I think about other people. I mean, when you were, let's say 25 years old or whatever, and you always think, well, if I was just making this, it would be so much better, and then if I, whatever position in your life, and a lot of us, might be making, that number, whatever it was. Are you really that much happier than you were? Because you may be, but it might not be. It probably isn't because of the dollars associated with that. You just think it'll take care of all my problems, and the reality is there's just different problems.
Yeah.
New problems.
Very true. Just different problems.
Yeah, and I think, so I like that quote a lot. Obviously it makes perfect sense. It's harder for people to show that kindness, humility, empathy for others to see that from them than it is to go out and buy something fancy that everyone sees. Just it's right in your face.
Well, let's get into chapter 9 then.
Yeah. I was going to say one more comment. What's really interesting too is like when I see someone driving like a muscle car, like my first reaction is actually a negative perception of that person, of like, oh, they must be overcompensating for something. Like it's, I think it's to the point now where you almost get like the absolute negative, like a disrespect for that person, to be like, what a fool. Like they just spent how much money on a car? Like, that could be housing or something, or lots of like valuable purchasing for someone.
Absolutely. I always thought it's just real cool when you hear the motorcycle go by that just deafens everybody on the street. That's no, you wonder, what is going through some people's minds. Now there is a point too, like, with our experience of people who have substantial wealth, I mean, at some point they're almost literally looking, they're trying to find ways to spend their money, right?
Mhm.
I mean, nobody needs that $200,000 car. I mean, there's literally, it's not doing anything that any other, even a car that is half that price is getting you. It's just, I'm trying to, you get to a point where there's just things you're trying to buy. I mean, so some people are like that, and then there's others that are just going out on a limb. They're really trying to do that to impress others who they don't know for whatever, insecurities they're covering for, I guess.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah, and it's hard to know that just by passing by on the street or something like that, unless you really
Mm-hmm.
know the person.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah, but Kenny, chapter 9 rolls right into the point that you were just making of what do you actually see versus what's there, or what do you get?
Yeah, and I mean, I like my favorite quote in here is the one we're talking about Rihanna. It was like, dude, was it really necessary to tell her that if you bought all this stuff,
Uh-huh.
you're going to end up with lots of stuff and no money? I mean, and that's
Yeah.
it's true.
Mhm.
Yeah. And I think that's very common for a lot of athletes, entertainers, right? That didn't grow up in that culture of wealth and to all of a sudden have it. Yeah, I think it is very easy to not realize that, it seems like common sense, but I can see how someone didn't grow up that way, right? It just, you don't
Absolutely.
really realize it when you get older.
I mean, I can see how, I don't know how Rihanna grew up specifically. I think she's from Jamaica, right? But any, person that came from nothing to they also, because it's not taught in schools and it's not taught, um, as it should be, they get, this money that they really just have no understanding of how it works, how it operates. I mean, I've got, $1 million. It means I can buy any and everything that's there. I think I gave the example. I wish I could remember the story better, but just how little it was like the guy, or they were driving a new Powerball. This was with an advisor, another advisor I know. He was in high school and or college, and he was doing manual labor, and he was driving with these guys, and he saw a billboard, and the new Powerball was you won $100 million or some astronomical figure, and the guys were like, well, what would you do if you won? And the one guy was like, man, I don't know. I think I'd maybe even be able to, I'd get a new truck. It was like a new truck with no comprehension of really how much
Right.
money that
Yeah.
is and
Mhm.
what that can actually buy you. And, especially young people who come from mostly lower, lower economic status backgrounds get an influx of money. They don't know, what to do with it. They don't understand money. It's why you see lottery winners, right? Like,
Hmm.
the exact stat, but they blow through their money more often than not.
Yeah. I do think the value that people put on money is learned, right? And I do think it's so interesting to see different people's upbringing with money, and I think that's a good example of it, right? Because it's not as there's just something about money, and I think this is why Morgan wrote the book, right? There's just some stuff that are it's obvious, but like if there's so much emotion tied to it that we don't really look at it from a rational perspective. And I think also talking about money in our culture is seen as a taboo, right? Like people don't, people want to ask you about it, but you're like, oh, that's not polite. And it's interesting, like growing up in my family where we talked a lot about money, we talked a lot about debt and budgeting, whatever, versus other folks that I've heard saying, no, like their parents never talked to them about money. And I was like, well, how do you expect kids to grow up and kind of understand some of these lessons about money if you're not talking about them and you're not sharing and being transparent? And so I think it is really interesting about, that we get surprised that people have certain money habits, but I think they're all learned.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think you're completely right about that. Yeah, and from an early age. I mean, one one question that I always like to ask, to clients or prospective clients is, what is one of your earliest memories of money? Whether it was good, bad, indifferent, just what was one of the first things that you remember? Was it something you saw that your friend got to do that you didn't? Or was it your own experience with earning an allowance? Or was it, a parent had a hardship with their job? It could be literally anything. But all of those points from an early age, I think, start to set the foundation for how you perceive money later in life. And in many households today, it can be different between, from one generation to the next. It could be different from one spouse to the other. It varies really, really greatly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. What is your, Mark? What's your earliest memory of money?
My earliest memory, I don't remember the earliest one. I think I said this in one of our previous book club meetings, but I just remember thinking when I was growing up, one of my best friends, and still to this day is one of my best friends. He had a golf cart, and we would ride around the neighborhood on the golf cart, just up and down the street and all that. I didn't have a golf cart, and so I thought that was the coolest thing, and I thought that's what, that's what money meant. It was that I could have a golf cart too. Right.
Mhm.
So obviously that's a material thing, but it was also for us at the time an experience because we would take that thing everywhere. So that's one example. But then, at the same time, there was periods where my parents had hardship with their jobs, going through a layoff. And my dad at one point worked for ADT Tyco, which was an Enron-like situation. And despite the fact that he did very well and was a top producing employee and all that sort of stuff, didn't really matter. So that was another money lesson from my childhood.
Wow. Yeah, that's really powerful. Wow. Yeah, one of my lessons, I remember my dad used to carry a lot of change in his pockets, and at the end of the day, he would like throw it in a drawer or whatever. And I remember I would collect all that change. It's like all around the house. Do you remember when we had like pennies and then you'd find them like everywhere, like in your couch cushions and like in the washing machine? And then I would take the family out to dinner to like Wendy's or Taco Bell. And it was such a cool like experience for me because I felt like I was like, earning the money. I mean, even to this day, like if I see coins on the ground outside, like I pick them up and I scoop them and I'm like, you never know when you'll need this. But it's so interesting. Like I gave my 3-year-old a couple of pennies to put in his piggy bank and he was like, no, I need dollars.
Wow.
And I was like, no, this is money. And he's like, no, I need the paper ones.
I like that kind of money.
Yeah. I'm like, this, if you get enough of them, they add up. And he just didn't believe me. He's like, no one uses these.
He said, you know how long it would take to make those 2 pennies to one of those paper ones? That would be a lot.
Yeah, we did the math, right? It doesn't take very long.
Yeah.
A lot of compounding.
Exactly.
You got to get that money working for you though.
That's right.
Yeah. I mean, I remember one time as a kid, first like memory of having my own money is whatever. I was at this this paper mill village, which is where our office is actually. And I was getting I don't know if I was buying baseball cards or something, and I had I think it was a $10 bill, and I probably absentmindedly put it up, just rested it somewhere, and walked away and was looking at something, and then it was gone. I just remember just that. This was a devastating moment.
Oh, yeah, that's a
I
lesson.
still talk about that, and it's.
Yeah.
No, I just remember like how I think just understanding the importance of that. Like at least to me, it was the first time where I was just like that was just so devastating having done that, and how absent-minded you just kind of it's too hard to come by to let it to do something irresponsible like that.
Oof, yeah, that's a hard one. That's a good lesson to learn early though.
Yeah, I'm glad I learned it early.
Right.
Absolutely.
Well,
yes.
in this chapter, he also talks about rich versus wealthy. And one thing is that just human tendency is to think of wealth as what you see, kind of like we saw on the last slides. What are the data points that you can pick up on? But in reality, what that really is he makes the argument, is that that's just rich. That's not actual wealth. And rich being defined as more or less what your current income is. And it's either what you're spending money on or what you have debt on, because that's where your income is going towards. But with this idea being, rich related to income, that's where you're trying to make yourself known, either with the shiny car, the fancy house, whatever it might be. But then on the flip side, true wealth is it's hidden. It's what you're not spending, even though you could. Like, you could go out and spend that money and do what you want, but you're electing to forego that for a future opportunity or for something greater down the line. And that is really what defines wealth.
Do you guys get the question, what is wealthy?
Occasionally.
What do you say?
Well, I mean, I think that that's just totally dependent on, my general definition would be that it's somebody who has enough money that they can live the life that they want to and not worry about it, right? In terms of, if we're talking wealthy in terms of, monetarily speaking. I mean, when my personal, I think of people, I mean, and this is personally, that is wealthy, truly, ultra high net worth, they would have $20 million. That's to me where you've got enough that you can, have a jet. You can literally do whatever you want. Now, to others, right, that's an astronomical figure. It's more than, virtually everyone in the world. But that's what I think of. But I mean, you can talk about wealth in terms of, family and love and things like that. So, but that's how would you answer that? What would you think?
Yeah, no, it's weird. Like, I remember when I was just starting out, like, for some reason, like 5 million in my head was like, God, like that's a lot of money. Like, that's a ton of money. And now it's like 5 million just doesn't seem wealthy to me anymore for some reason. And now it's like, now my number, like, I remember with Jim and I, like, we're like, okay, 10. When we get to 10, like, then we can do whatever we want. And now it's like, gosh, that still doesn't seem like enough. So it's also, I feel like that goalpost keeps moving, right? And I think that was an earlier chapter where, like, you put a dollar in your head, and then for some reason, when you get closer to it, it's like, no, that's not really what wealth is.
Because you can essentially, you can always want more, right? I mean, you can always want more, right? I mean, somebody with $5 million in the bank or $5 million invested, that is a lot of money. I mean, it's a lot, but it's not enough that you can do probably everything you want to do whenever you want to do it. I mean, it depends on your lifestyle and your upbringing and all that, right? I mean, that's where I would think as to where, 20 million, right? I mean, you can have a jet, you can have, that's just creating, enough income off of that money that it becomes hard to spend, right? I mean, that's where you see the people just buying stuff. It's like eventually, a guy like thinking, I don't know, Tiger Woods, right? I mean, he has a $30 million yacht. Otherwise it's like, well, really, what am I going to do with all this money?
Yeah.
Sure, he gives the money to, lots of money to charity too, but it's really like, I mean, at some point, there's nothing to do with it. I mean, but just go find things to buy. And that's where, people start to do, stuff like that.
And I think that it applies anywhere on the spectrum. Ultimately, it all gets back to, again, what do you want to get out of your money? There's people that do have $2-3 million, but that spend 40 grand a year, and the thought of spending 50 grand a year is just totally bizarre. That they're like, we would never do that. Not because they can't, just because they're like, well, we're happy, we're content, we got everything that we need. What more is there? And so even though they, quote unquote, only have, let's say, $2 or $3 million, not 20 or 30,
Yep.
never spend that money.
Well, it's also, I mean, it gets way down than that, right? I mean, there's some people, if you said I gave you $20,000, you know, that would be a life altering experience for them. They would never see that, right? That would increase their happiness way more than the guy who has 2 million giving them another 2 million, just because that gives them, I think you even talked about in this book, that cushion, right? Now I don't have to worry about, if I lose my job, I can say, I do have the freedom to find a good job. I don't have to go and, the next day and take something that I don't want to do. I have that, if something happens with my air conditioner, I can now fix that. As to where the guy with 20 million, if you gave him another 20 million, there's literally nothing he'd do with it.
Life doesn't change.
Yeah.
There's a great article out. I can't remember who wrote it or where it's from, but he basically says there's three levels of wealthy. And I can remember two of the categories, but essentially it's, the first level is you can pay your bills but not have to worry about it. The second level is you can go out to eat and you don't have to worry about it. You can go eat wherever you want and not have to
Okay.
worry about it. And the third level is you can go on vacation and not have to worry about it anywhere you want. But you could probably expand those to different level
Right.
tranches. But I think that's an interesting way of thinking about it, of a tiered structure. And it all gets back, starting with kind of the basics, then a little more, then a little more.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Now, somebody might go on vacation and spend $1,000. Somebody might spend $100,000. As with
Right.
all relative.
Right.
Yeah, vacation can be, yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, to me, it's kind of that difference between like cash flow versus like an asset, right? Like to me, rich is you've got good cash flow, you're buying stuff, but wealthy is like the assets that you've got, your net worth behind. And so you could have a zero income, but you could have a lot of net worth, or you could have very little net worth because you spend all your income.
Mhm.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah. There's a
Wealthy
huge,
versus rich. Somebody who makes $1 million but spends $1 million is not any better off than somebody who makes 100 grand and spends 90.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
From a
I mean,
wealth
there's a
perspective.
huge difference between making a lot of money and having a lot of money. I
Yeah.
mean, those are two different categories of people. The ones, I mean, to me, I think we all strive to be the ones that have a lot of money, right? Because that's what gives you truly the freedom, because that can't just be taken away from you. As
Right.
to where your income, look, we're never promised you never promised anything. So you never know what can happen, with that. So that's why you work hard to save, put yourself in a position that you have money.
Hmm. Yeah. I think
Yeah.
that goes to the next point, which is, a lot of people just, they don't, they don't know because maybe they haven't learned or it's harder to see, but the restraint that it takes to get to that point. What have people had to sacrifice along the way to get to wherever they are? It could have been taking risk in, a job or a career or a business that you own, or it could have been just the restraint to say, nope, I'm not going to spend more than I actually earn, and I'm going to live below what I theoretically could. Everybody's got a little different journey of how they are getting there.
Yep.
But
Mm,
yeah, this is a good quote that summarizes pretty much everything that we've been talking about. I think
Mm-hmm.
quick to judge, especially in the day and age that we live. Everything is in your face, with technology, how quickly information travels, how visible everything can be. Um, quick to draw conclusions about what is.
Yeah. Very true.
what is? Go ahead. Were you about to say something?
Oh, no, I was just agreeing.
Yeah. What I mean, it's one of what is seven deadly sins, right? Is jealousy, I guess, or you want what you see others have. I mean, and
Mhm.
one of the true like signs of wealth that has nothing to do with necessarily finances is being content. You know, being yeah, he talks about it earlier.
Mhm.
Is what he'll never have what I have, which is enough.
Mhm.
Having enough for you and that contentment are probably um, those are probably really the happiest people
Mhm.
because they don't want what they can't, that there's not always something better.
Yep.
It's I'm happy with who I am and what I do.
Yeah.
Yep.
Any other thoughts more that you have, or?
My only thought is that, this is also such a Western conversation, right? Like, I'm reading another book right now that kind of talks about um, community, and it really just talks about how America is just, it's such an individual, we champion individualization, right? We champion people like pulling them up from their bootstraps, and like, and we look down upon people that don't have money, and we assume it's because they're not hardworking, or they're not, they're doing something wrong, they're lazy or whatever. And it's just so interesting to kind of think about that and juxtapose it with like other cultures, right? And I'm thinking specifically of China, which, granted, it's a lot more capitalistic than they probably claim that their communist culture is, but where, you don't have such huge wealth gap between the rich and the poor, and you don't get looked down upon. And it's so interesting to have this conversation, but we have to remember, it's like within this Western culture, specifically an American culture, just with how consumer driven everything is. I mean, like, to your point, it's so in your face. And you're told that you need all of this stuff. And one of the things that I'm trying to teach the boys, right, is that need versus wants. Like, you actually don't need a whole lot. It's mostly what you want. But it's so, you just get, with all the messaging, you just get caught up in it, right? You
Yeah.
want the newest iPhone, you want the newest, technology. And it's hard. It's kind of that, it's the culture that we live in that is supporting that. And sometimes you feel like you're fighting it if you aren't going with the stream.
I think you're so right on that. Yeah. And then it gets down to prioritizing. Okay, out of your wants, what is most important?
Mhm.
Many of us are fortunate to truly have our needs taken care of. Not everybody can say that. But a lot of us can. And then from there, yeah, everybody's got a laundry list of wants, but what do you prioritize? What do you want first? What are you going to work towards to get that first?
Yep.
Yeah.
I think, I mean, a lot of that has to do, I mean, it's it's societally, it's reflect, it's just an extension of how the individuals are, right? I mean, because people in rural China or in Central African country that is extremely poor don't care, they're so beyond their scope, right? They're money, they're not thinking, they're thinking in terms of survival and able to eat the next meal and making sure that the crop comes in or whatever it may be. And where it's so far out of their realm to be thinking about having the new iPhone or having this fast car. I mean, they just want clean water in a place that things that we were 200 years ago, that we were in the same, as a Western society, we're the same way. And you're always wanting more and better and better.
Yeah.
And that's where it's just, I think it's just human nature, really. So,
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And it's like, to me, it also goes back to like the happiness, right? Like, people think, oh, Americans should be happier because they have more stuff. And it's actually the opposite. It's actually people that don't have a lot, but what drives happiness is more about community and connection and family and those intangible stuff, which Americans, because of our individualized culture, right? We disconnect a lot from, we don't have 3 generations living in the same house like a lot of cultures do. We don't surround ourselves and raise our kids, with all of our extended family. We go it alone, and it's actually, it leads to a decline in happiness. But we have better stuff. We have more stuff.
yeah. Yeah.
Well, that's a unique perspective. I appreciate you bringing that, Morley. That really is. So,
Chapter 10.
Chapter 10,
Agreed.
we've been doing 2 at a time, but chapter 10 it's a good one with a lot of meat, and it talks all about saving. So we may end up doing that just on its own, or maybe we'll squeeze in 11.
Okay.
We'll be prepared for both. Then we'll see what we get to.
Sounds good.
All right. Thanks, guys.
All right. See you